The sound echoed before anyone could breathe. A sharp slap cut through the wedding hall, louder than the drums, louder than the prayers. The bride staggered slightly, her white veil trembling as her face turned to the side, shock frozen in her wide, glassy eyes. Guests gasped. Someone dropped a glass. Silence followed, heavy, cruel silence. The woman who slapped her stood tall, unashamed. The bride did not scream. She did not fall. She simply swallowed her pain, blinking back tears as every eye judged her in that single broken moment. At the back of the hall, an older man slowly rose from his seat. His jaw tightened. His hands shook. And in his eyes burned a truth no one there was ready for. Before we enter this powerful story, tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. And if stories of love, karma, and hidden truths move you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Long before the wedding day, long before the slap that froze an entire hall, Amara had learned how to survive silence. She lived in Ibadan, a city that never truly slept, where morning prayers blended with honking buses and evening markets glowed under tired yellow bulbs. Amara moved through those streets quietly dressed, simply speaking gently, never drawing attention to herself. To most people, she was just another young woman trying to make life work in a difficult world. But there was something about her that people often misunderstood. She did not complain when things were unfair. She did not argue when others looked down on her. And she never explained herself when she was judged. Amara worked at a small community center on the outskirts of the city, helping widows and street children learn basic skills, sewing, reading, counting money. She earned little, but she gave much. When asked why she chose such work, she always smiled and said, "Someone once helped me when I had nothing. That was all." When Daniel first met her, it wasn't at a fancy event or a business meeting. It was during a heavy afternoon rain. Amara had taken shelter under the leaking roof of a roadside shop, holding a box of donated books close to her chest. Daniel, soaked and frustrated, stood beside her, laughing at the sky, as if it had personally betrayed him. "You look like the rain owes you an apology," she said softly. He looked at her surprised. Then he laughed. That laugh changed everything. Daniel was not poor. He worked as a project supervisor for a construction firm, earning enough to live comfortably. He dressed well, spoke confidently, and carried himself with the quiet pride of a man who believed he was building something meaningful with his life. What drew him to Amara was not her beauty, though she was beautiful in a calm, unforced way. It was her steadiness. Her eyes held no desperation. Her words carried no hunger for approval. She listened. They began talking after work, then sharing meals, then walking together through crowded streets where vendors shouted prices and children chased old tires. With Amara, Daniel felt peace. With Daniel, Amara felt normal, not special, not protected, just human. When Daniel told his mother about her, the reaction was immediate and cold. "So what does she do?" Mrs. Adeyemi asked, her voice sharp, even over the phone. "She works at a community center," Daniel replied. There was a pause, then a dismissive sigh. "Is that all?" Daniel frowned. "Mama, she's kind. She's intelligent. Kindness does not build houses," his mother interrupted. "Intelligence does not bring connections. Love is good, Daniel, but marriage is business." From that moment, Amara was already losing a battle she didn't know she was fighting. Mrs. Adiemi was a woman who measured people by what they could provide, money, influence, reputation. She had struggled in her younger years, and she wore her success like armor. She believed respect was taken, not earned, and she had raised Daniel to be ambitious, not sentimental. When she finally met Amara in person, her judgment was swift. She noticed Amara's modest dress. She noticed her simple phone. She noticed how she greeted elders with humility instead of confidence. And in her mind, she concluded, this girl is beneath us. Amara felt it immediately. The way Mrs. Adeyemi looked through her instead of at her. The way conversation stopped when she entered the room. The way questions were asked not to know her, but to expose her. Where are your parents? What does your family do? Who will help with the wedding expenses? Amara answered calmly every time. My parents are not around. My family values simple living. I don't expect anyone to carry my burden. Those answers only made things worse. Behind closed doors, Mrs. Adeyemi warned her son. She is hiding something, she said. Girls like that always are. Daniel defended Amara as best he could, but his voice weakened whenever his mother's hardened eyes met his. He loved Amara, but he feared disappointing the woman who raised him. When Daniel proposed, it was quiet. No crowd, no cameras, just the two of them sitting on a low wall, watching the sun melt into the horizon. I don't have much to offer, he said honestly. My family will not make this easy for you. Amara nodded. I don't need ease. I need truth. She said yes without hesitation. The engagement announcement landed like a stone dropped into still water. Relatives whispered. Friends questioned. Mrs. Adeyemi smiled publicly and complained privately. She agreed to the wedding, but only because she believed time would expose Amara's weakness. She will break, she told her sister. Girls like her always do. Amara, meanwhile, prepared for the wedding in her own way. She chose a simple gown. She refused expensive gifts. She insisted on contributing what little she could. When a coworker asked her why she tolerated the disrespect, Amara replied quietly, I am not here to fight. I am here to build. What no one knew, what no one even suspected, was that Amara had already walked away from a world far louder and far richer than theirs. A world of power, a world of wealth, a world she had chosen to leave behind. And as the wedding day drew closer, the silence she carried with her grew heavier, not with fear, but with certainty. Because Amara knew something they didn't. The slap was coming, the humiliation was coming, and so was the truth. From the moment Amara stepped into the Adeyemi family house, she understood one painful truth. This was not a home she was meant to belong to. The building itself was impressive. High walls, iron gates, polished floors that reflected light like mirrors. But warmth did not live there. Respect did not float freely in the air. Everything felt measured, weighed, and judged. Mrs. Adeyemi ruled the house the way a general ruled a camp. Her voice carried authority. Her footsteps commanded silence. Even the domestic staff moved carefully around her, as if one wrong move could shatter the peace. Amara tried her best. She greeted everyone with humility. She offered to help in the kitchen. She listened more than she spoke, but none of it softened Mrs. Adeyemi's heart. Instead, every small action became another reason to criticize. You cut vegetables like someone who has never cooked properly, Mrs. Adeyemi said one afternoon, watching Amara from across the kitchen. Amara lowered her eyes. I can learn, Ma. Mrs. Adeyemi scoffed. Marriage is not a classroom. Daniel heard these remarks often. Sometimes he protested. Sometimes he stayed silent. And each time he chose silence, Amara felt it like a quiet bruise forming under her skin. The insults were never loud. That was the cruelty of them. They were whispered subtle, wrapped in polite words. You are lucky my son sees something in you. Girls from your background should be grateful. Do not forget where you are coming from. Amara never answered back. At night, when she lay alone in her small room, she stared at the ceiling and breathed slowly, reminding herself why she was there. She had chosen Daniel. She had chosen love. And love, she believed, was patient. But patience had a cost. Family gatherings were the worst. Aunties would look her up and down, their eyes sharp with curiosity and judgment. Cousins spoke over her, dismissed her opinions, laughed at jokes she was never meant to understand. One evening, during a family dinner, someone asked loudly, So, Amara, what exactly do your people do? The table fell silent. Amara felt every gaze turned toward her. We live simply, she replied calmly. We value peace. A man chuckled. Peace doesn't pay school fees. Laughter followed. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. That's enough, he said weakly. Mrs. Adeyemi smiled into her food, saying nothing, because she did not need to. The message had already landed. Later that night, Daniel apologized. I'm sorry, he said, holding Amara's hands. They don't know you. Amara looked at him gently. Then help them know me. He nodded, but deep down, he wasn't sure he could. As the wedding plans progressed, the tension grew heavier. Mrs. Adeyemi insisted on controlling everything. The venue, the guest list, the seating arrangement. Amara's opinions were tolerated, but never truly considered. You don't understand how these things are done, Mrs. Adeyemi said. Leave it to people with experience. Amara noticed how often the word people meant people like us. One afternoon, while discussing wedding attire, Mrs. Adeyemi finally said what she had been thinking all along. I hope you understand, she said coolly. This marriage is already a compromise. Amara froze. A compromise, she asked softly. Yes. Daniel could have married into a powerful family. Instead, he chose love. Mrs. Adeyemi sighed dramatically. Love does not last forever. Something shifted inside Amara, then not anger, but clarity. She realized she was not being tested. She was being tolerated. And tolerance, she knew, could turn to cruelty at any moment. Still, she stayed silent. Not because she was weak, but because she was waiting. Waiting for the right moment. Waiting for the truth to speak louder than words, unknown to Mrs. Adeyemi. Someone else was watching closely. From a distance, a man followed the preparations quietly. He did not attend meetings. He did not interfere. He only observed through calls, messages, and trusted eyes. He had asked once, "Is she happy?" The answer he received was careful. "She is enduring." That answer troubled him deeply. As the wedding day approached, rumors began to spread. Some said Amara was marrying above her station. Others said Daniel was blinded by love. A few whispered that Amara was hiding a dark past. Mrs. Adeyemi heard all of it and believed the worst. She thinks silence will save her, she told a friend. On that wedding day, she will learn her place. Amara, on the other hand, spent her evenings alone writing in a small notebook. Thoughts she never voiced. Fears she never shared. Hopes she still held on to. She wrote about dignity. She wrote about choice. She wrote about the strength it takes to remain gentle in a hard world. The night before the wedding, Daniel found her sitting quietly. "Are you scared?" he asked. Amara smiled faintly. "No, I am ready." He did not understand what she meant. Neither did his mother. But destiny was already moving. And inside the Adeyemi household, behind polished walls and proud smiles, a storm was gathering. The slap that would shock everyone was no accident. It was the result of months of contempt, silence, and unchecked pride. And when it finally came, it would expose not Amara's weakness, but everyone else's. There were nights when Amara dreamed of a life she had once known, wide halls filled with quiet power voices that spoke softly but commanded nations, and a man whose presence alone could stop a room mid-sentence, her father. In those dreams, he stood tall in tailored suits, his face calm, his eyes sharp with wisdom, earned through decades of building empires across Africa. He never shouted. He never begged. When he spoke, people listened because he had learned long ago that real power did not need noise. Amara always woke from those dreams with mixed emotions. That world had given her everything: money, protection, privilege. And yet, it had taken something from her too. She had been 16 when she made the choice. Her father, Chief Kola Adebayo, was already a legend in business circles. From Lagos to Accra, from Nairobi to Johannesburg, his name opened doors that never closed again. He owned construction firms, shipping companies, agricultural estates, and a fast-growing bank that politicians quietly depended on. To the public, he was disciplined, strategic, untouchable. To Amara, he was simply a father who worked too much. Her mother had died when she was young, and after that, the house filled with staff advisors and visitors, but not warmth. Amara grew up surrounded by luxury, yet lonely in ways money could never fix. At school, people treated her differently. Teachers expected excellence. Classmates either feared her or pretended to be her friend. Every mistake she made became gossip. Every success was dismissed as privilege. One day, after overhearing two girls whisper, if she wasn't rich, she'd be nothing, something inside Amara broke. That night, she confronted her father. "I don't want this life anymore," she said, standing in his private study. "I don't want people to see my name before they see me." Chief Adebayo listened quietly. "This name has protected you," he replied calmly. "It has given you opportunities." "Yes," Amara said, tears in her eyes, "but it has never given me truth." For the first time in years, her father did not argue. Instead, he asked, "What do you want?" "I want to live as myself," she said, "not as your shadow." The next morning, she left with a small bag. A modest allowance she insisted would not be renewed, and a promise she made him swear to keep. "Do not interfere," she said. "Do not rescue me. Let me find my own strength. It was the hardest promise Chief Adebayo had ever made. For years, Amara lived quietly. She studied. She worked. She volunteered. She learned what it meant to struggle not for survival, but for dignity. And every challenge she faced strengthened her belief that she had made the right choice. She never used her father's name, never touched his wealth, never asked for his influence. When Daniel entered her life, she saw something pure, someone who liked her without knowing anything about where she came from. That mattered more to her than he would ever understand, which was why she never told him the truth. Not because she was ashamed, but because she feared it would change everything. She feared that love would turn into admiration, that respect would turn into fear, that choices would no longer be honest. So she stayed silent and paid the price. As Mrs. Adeyemi's contempt grew, Amara felt the familiar pull to escape to end everything before it hurt more. But something held her back. Daniel. He was flawed, yes. Weak sometimes, yes. But he loved her in the way he knew how. And Amara believed people deserved the chance to grow. Meanwhile, Chief Adebayo watched from afar. He knew about Daniel. He knew about the wedding. And he knew about the mother. Every report he received tightened his chest. She is being disrespected, one aide said carefully. She refuses to complain, said another. She insists this is her choice. Chief Adebayo trusted his daughter, but he was still a father. He wanted to step in, to end the insults, to remind the world who she was. But he remembered her words. Let me find my own strength. So he waited. He planned to attend the wedding quietly, not as a billionaire, not as a figure of power, just as a guest. A father watching his daughter begin a new chapter. He did not know then that he would witness the most painful moment of her life. The morning of the wedding arrived bright and unforgiving. Amara stood before a mirror in a small dressing room, adjusting her veil. She looked calm, but inside her chest emotions collided, hope, fear, resolve. A voice inside her whispered, "Today will change everything." She did not know how true that was as she stepped into the hall, greeted by music and forced smiles. She caught sight of a familiar figure seated at the back. Their eyes met for just a second. Her breath caught. Her father gave a subtle nod. No words, no gestures, just trust. Amara straightened her shoulders. Whatever happened today, she would face it as herself, not as a daughter of power, not as a victim of cruelty, but as a woman who knew her worth. Mrs. Adeyemi, watching from the front row, saw none of this. All she saw was a girl she believed needed to be humbled. And in that belief, she prepared to make the biggest mistake of her life. Because the truth Amara had hidden so carefully was not buried. It was waiting. Waiting for the exact moment when silence would no longer be enough. Morning light poured into the wedding venue like a promise it did not intend to keep. The hall stood grand and polished, decorated with layers of white fabric, gold trims, and fresh flowers flown in from across the city. Drummers tested their rhythms outside. Ushers moved quickly, adjusting chairs and greeting early guests with practiced smiles. Everything looked perfect, too perfect, for the storm quietly forming beneath the surface. Amara arrived early. She did not come with a large entourage. No long convoy. No loud celebration. Just her and two women from the community center who had insisted on helping her dress. They adjusted her veil, gently careful, not to smudge her makeup, whispering prayers under their breath. "You look beautiful," one of them said softly. Amara smiled, but her hands trembled slightly. Across the hall, Mrs. Adeyemi was already seated at the front, dressed in an expensive lace outfit that announced status before she spoke a word. She scanned the room with sharp eyes, greeting important guests with warmth and ignoring those she considered irrelevant. When she noticed Amara entering, her smile tightened. "So this is how she arrives," she muttered to her sister. "No family, no presents." Her sister leaned closer. "Maybe they are running late." Mrs. Adeyemi scoffed. "People like her don't run late. They don't come at all." Daniel arrived moments later, visibly nervous. His suit fit perfectly, but his mind was elsewhere. He searched for Amara immediately, relief washing over him when he found her seated quietly, her gaze fixed ahead. "You okay?" he whispered. Amara nodded. "I'm here." That answer unsettled him, though he couldn't explain why. As guests continued to arrive, the imbalance became more obvious. Daniel's side of the hall filled quickly. Relatives, colleagues, business associates. Amara's side remained sparse. A few friends. A few quiet faces. Whispers began. "Is that all? Did her family refuse to attend? Maybe she has no one." Mrs. Adeyemi heard every word and said nothing to stop them. Instead, she stood and walked slowly toward Amara, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. "I hope you are not embarrassed," she said in a low voice, her smile tight but poisonous. "This is a big day. People notice these things." Amara looked up at her calmly. "I'm not embarrassed, Ma." Mrs. Adeyemi raised an eyebrow. "You should be." Before Amara could respond, a sudden shift in the atmosphere rippled through the hall. A man had entered. He wore a dark, well-tailored suit, not flashy, not simple. His posture was upright, controlled. He moved without urgency, yet every step carried quiet authority. He did not announce himself. He did not greet loudly. He simply took a seat at the back, his eyes scanning the room until they found Amara. Their eyes met. For a brief moment, Amara's composure wavered. Her breath caught, but she quickly steadied herself. Mrs. Adeyemi noticed the exchange. "Who is that?" she whispered sharply to an usher. The usher shook his head. "I don't know, Ma." He arrived alone. Mrs. Adeyemi frowned. Something about the man unsettled her, though she could not explain it. The ceremony began. Music filled the hall. Guests stood. Amara walked slowly toward the altar. Her steps measured, her face composed. To anyone watching closely, there was a quiet strength in her posture, as if she had already survived something far worse than judgmental stares. As she passed Mrs. Adeyemi, the older woman leaned toward her and whispered, "Remember today, this is the highest you will ever rise." Amara did not respond. The officiant began speaking about love, patience, unity. Words floated through the air, beautiful and hollow. Daniel tried to focus, but his eyes kept drifting toward his mother, then back to Amara. When it was time for the exchange of vows, Amara spoke clearly, her voice steady. "I choose you," she said, looking directly at Daniel. "Not for what you have, but for who you are and who you can become." Some guests shifted uncomfortably. When Daniel spoke, his voice wavered. I choose you because you make me want to be better. Mrs. Adeyemi's jaw tightened. Then came the moment that changed everything. As the officiant asked if there were any objections, Mrs. Adeyemi rose slowly from her seat. Gasps rippled through the hall. I object, she said loudly. Daniel turned sharply. Mama, what are you doing? She ignored him. I will not allow my son to marry a woman who brings shame into this family. She continued, her voice cold and controlled. A woman with no roots, no respect, no people. The hall erupted into murmurs. Amara stood frozen, her heart pounding. Daniel stepped forward. This is not the time. Mrs. Adeyemi turned on Amara, her eyes blazing. You think silence makes you innocent? You think standing there quietly gives you value? Amara swallowed. Ma, I have done nothing but respect you. That sentence, soft, honest, was the spark. Mrs. Adeyemi's face twisted with rage. Before anyone could stop her, she raised her hand and struck Amara across the face. The sound echoed like thunder. The hall fell into stunned silence. Amara staggered, her veil, shifting, her cheek burning. She did not cry out. She did not fall. She simply stood there, shock rippling through her body, eyes wide and glassy. Daniel shouted, Mama. Guests gasped. Some stood. Others froze. At the back of the hall, the man in the dark suit slowly rose to his feet. His hands clenched. His eyes darkened. And for the first time since entering, he moved forward. But he did not speak. Not yet. Because the moment of humiliation had arrived and the moment of reckoning was close behind. For a moment, after the slap, the world simply stopped. No drums, no whispers, no movement. The echo of Mrs. Adeyemi's palm against Amara's cheek lingered in the air, like a wound that refused to close. Guests stood, frozen mouths, half-open eyes wide with disbelief. A child somewhere began to cry, quickly, silenced by a panicked parent. Amara felt heat spread across her face, sharp and stinging. Her ears rang. The white veil slipped slightly from her hair, and for a split second, her knees threatened to give way. But they didn't. She stood there, unmoving, not because she wasn't hurt, but because she refused to collapse. Daniel was the first to react. Mama, he shouted, stepping forward. His voice cracked with shock and anger. What have you done? Mrs. Adeyemi's chest rose and fell rapidly. Her hand trembled slightly, but she did not lower it in shame. Instead, she lifted her chin as if daring anyone to challenge her. I did what needed to be done, she said loudly. This girl needed to learn respect. Amara turned slowly to face her. Her eyes were wet, but not broken. I have respected you, Amara said quietly, even when you did not respect me. The softness of her voice made the words cut deeper. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some guests avoided Amara's gaze, embarrassed by their silence. Others stared openly, unsure whose side to take. Daniel moved to Amara's side, placing himself slightly in front of her, as if to shield her. This wedding is over, he said, his voice shaking not with fear, but with rage. You will not touch my wife again. Mrs. Adeyemi laughed bitterly. Your wife, she scoffed. A woman with no family, no standing. You disgrace me. Amara felt something shift inside her then. Not anger, not hatred, clarity. She realized that no apology would ever come. No understanding would ever grow from this woman's heart. And waiting, enduring, hoping would only teach others how to hurt her better. She took a small step forward. "I will leave," Amara said calmly. Daniel turned toward her alarmed. "No, you don't have to go." "I choose to," she replied gently. "I will not stay where I am beaten and shamed." The word beaten landed heavily in the room. Mrs. Adeyemi opened her mouth to speak, but another voice cut through the tension. Enough. It was deep, controlled, unyielding. Every head turned toward the back of the hall. The man in the dark suit was walking forward, his steps slow but purposeful. With each step, the room seemed to shrink around him. Conversations died. Even Mrs. Adeyemi fell silent, her confidence wavering for the first time. He stopped a few feet from Amara. For a brief moment, he looked at her, not as a powerful man, not as a stranger, but as a father, seeing his child wounded. "Are you hurt?" he asked quietly. Amara nodded once. "I'm fine." He did not believe her, but he respected her strength enough not to argue. Then he turned to Mrs. Adeyemi. "I witnessed what you did," he said evenly, "and I want to understand something." Mrs. Adeyemi stiffened. "Who are you to question me in my son's wedding?" The man's eyes hardened slightly. "I am someone who values dignity." She scoffed, trying to regain control. "This is a family matter. Outsiders should mind their place." The man paused, then smiled faintly, not in amusement, but in restraint. "Very well," he said. "Then allow me to speak as family." A wave of confusion swept the hall. Amara inhaled sharply. "Papa," she began, but he raised a hand, gently stopping her. "Not yet," he murmured. Daniel stared at the man, his heart pounding. "Sir, who are you?" The man looked at him calmly. "In time." Mrs. Adeyemi felt something cold creep into her chest. The certainty she had carried all morning was slipping through her fingers. "This wedding is suspended," she snapped. "I will not be challenged in my own." "You already were," the man interrupted softly, "by your own actions." Silence fell again, this time heavier, more deliberate. Amara reached up slowly and removed her veil. She folded it carefully in her hands, then looked around the room. "I did not come here to be humiliated," she said. "I came in love. I leave in self-respect." Some guests bowed their heads. Others looked ashamed. Daniel stepped closer. "Amara, please, don't walk away." She looked at him with sadness and affection. "This is not about love alone. It's about boundaries." Mrs. Adeyemi's voice trembled now. "You think you can shame me in front of my people and walk away?" Amara turned to her. "You shamed yourself." A gasp echoed. The man in the dark suit nodded slightly, pride flickering in his eyes. "Let her go," he said to Daniel gently. "If she stays now, she teaches them that pain has no consequence." Daniel's shoulders sagged. Tears burned his eyes. Amara turned to him one last time. "If you truly love me, you will decide who you are without hiding behind your mother." Then she walked away. Each step echoed loudly across the floor. No one stopped her. No one dared. Mrs. Adeyemi collapsed into her chair, her breath shallow, her mind racing. Something had gone terribly wrong, but she still didn't know what. At the back of the hall, whispers rose again, but they were different now. That man, who is he? The way he spoke, Did you see how she carried herself? The man watched Amara disappear through the doors. Then he turned back to the room. "This is not over," he said calmly. "Not for any of you." And with that, he followed her. Outside, sunlight burned brighter than before. Amara stood alone, breathing deeply, her hand pressed against her cheek. The man approached her slowly. "You were brave," he said. She nodded, tears finally falling. "I didn't want it to end like this." "It didn't end," he replied. "It revealed." She looked up at him then. "Papa, I'm sorry you had to see that." He shook his head. "I am not sorry. Today you showed them who you are without my name, without my power." Inside the hall, Mrs. Adeyemi sat in silence. Her pride cracked her certainty, shattered. She had struck a woman she believed was powerless, and in doing so, she had awakened a truth that would soon shake her world. By the time Amara left the wedding venue, the sun was high, and so were the whispers. They followed her like shadows. Inside the hall, chaos replaced celebration. Chairs scraped against the floor. Guests clustered into tight circles, voices low but urgent. Phones appeared in hands where prayers had once rested. The slap had lasted 1 second. Its consequences were spreading like wildfire. Did you see her face? She didn't even scream. That man, who was he? I've never seen anyone speak to Mrs. Adeyemi like that. Mrs. Adeyemi remained seated at the front, rigid and pale. The authority she wore like armor had cracked. People who once rushed to greet her now hesitated, watching her from a distance, measuring their words. Her sister leaned in. "What have you done?" Mrs. Adeyemi swallowed hard. "I did what was necessary." But the room did not agree. Across the aisle, Daniel stood frozen, his suit suddenly too tight, his heart too heavy. He felt as if the ground beneath him had shifted, exposing everything he had refused to confront. She didn't deserve that, he said aloud, though he wasn't sure to whom. An uncle shook his head. "You should have stopped your mother long ago." Another relative whispered, "That girl carried herself like royalty." Royalty. The word stung Mrs. Adeyemi more than the slap ever could. Outside, Amara stood near the gate, the sounds of traffic blending with her breathing. Her cheek throbbed, but it was nothing compared to the ache in her chest. She felt hollow, like a house emptied too quickly. Her father stood beside her, silent present. "I wanted to disappear," Amara admitted quietly. "I didn't want anyone to look at me." He nodded. Sometimes dignity demands visibility. She exhaled slowly. "I thought if I stayed quiet long enough, they would see me." "They saw what they wanted," he replied, until silence became a mirror. They stood there for a moment, letting the noise of the city ground them. Inside the hall, Mrs. Adeyemi finally stood. She tried to regain control with a raised hand and a forced smile. "The ceremony is postponed," she announced. "There has been a misunderstanding." A woman near the back murmured, "A misunderstanding doesn't leave a mark on a bride's face." Mrs. Adeyemi heard it. Her smile faltered. She moved toward Daniel, her voice dropping. "Go after her. Fix this." Daniel looked at his mother, really looked at her, and something hardened in his eyes. "You didn't just hit her," he said quietly. "You humiliated her in front of everyone." Mrs. Adeyemi scoffed. "She embarrassed me first." Daniel shook his head. "No, we embarrassed ourselves." The words landed like a verdict. Meanwhile, outside a car pulled up smoothly. The driver stepped out and opened the back door with quiet respect. Amara hesitated. "I didn't want this," she said. Her father met her gaze. "Neither did I. But protection is not the same as interference. You asked me to wait." "I waited." She nodded. "Thank you." As she stepped into the car, eyes from the hall followed. Some curious, some regretful, some newly afraid. The vehicle pulled away. Within minutes, the story had escaped the venue. A cousin posted a vague message. A guest shared a video. No sound, just the moment after the slap, frozen faces, and trembling hands. Speculation exploded. Bride assaulted at her own wedding. Mother-in-law crosses the line. Who was the man who stopped her? Mrs. Adeyemi's phone buzzed incessantly. Messages poured in, some concerned, some accusatory. A longtime friend called. "Are you all right?" "What happened there?" Mrs. Adeyemi snapped. People should mind their business. But the business had already found them. By evening, the narrative had shifted. Sympathy moved toward the bride. Questions sharpened, and the mystery man, his calm authority, his timing, became the center of every discussion. That night, Daniel sat alone in his apartment, replaying everything. Amara's composure, his mother's raised hand, his own hesitation. He realized the truth with painful clarity. Love without courage was cruelty disguised as patience. He had asked Amara to endure for him. He had watched her absorb insults meant for him to confront. And when it mattered most, he had been one step too late. At the Adeyemi house, Mrs. Adeyemi paced the living room. She felt watched, judged. The walls that once echoed with her command now felt smaller. Her sister tried to calm her. "Perhaps you should apologize." To her, Mrs. Adeyemi snapped. "After what she did to me, what she did," the sister repeated. She stood still. That silence haunted Mrs. Adeyemi. Later that night, a knock sounded at the door. A man in a simple suit handed her an envelope. From whom, she demanded. He smiled politely. "You'll know?" Inside the envelope was a single card. No letterhead, no explanation. Just a name. Kola Adebayo. Her breath caught. The name stirred something distant and uncomfortable. Stories overheard at elite gatherings, a figure spoken of in careful tones. A man whose presence changed rooms. Her hands trembled. "It can't be," she whispered. Across town, Amara sat quietly in a guest room she had not used in years. The space felt familiar and strange all at once. She washed her face, staring at her reflection at the faint mark still blooming on her cheek. She touched it gently. "This is not the end," she told herself. Her father stood in the doorway. "Rest," he said. "Tomorrow, truth will do its work." She nodded. Back at the Adeyemi house, Mrs. Adeyemi sat down heavily. For the first time in years, fear crept into her certainty. She had believed power was loud, that respect was enforced, that silence meant submission. But the bride had walked away. The crowd had watched. And a name, just a name, had unsettled her more than any shout ever could. The slap had ended the wedding. The whispers were about to begin something far more devastating. Morning arrived, with a tension that felt heavier than the night before. News of the wedding incident had spread beyond whispers. It traveled through phone calls, private messages, and hushed conversations in offices and homes across the city. Everyone had a version of the story, but one detail remained the same in all of them. The man, the calm stranger who spoke with authority, the one who did not shout, the one who stopped a powerful woman without lifting a hand. At the Adeyemi house, Mrs. Adeyemi sat at the dining table, untouched tea growing cold in front of her. She had barely slept. The name on the card, Kola Adebayo, echoed in her mind like a warning bell that refused to stop ringing. She finally turned to her sister. "Call your husband." Her sister hesitated. Why now? Minutes later, the phone was on speaker. Kola Adebayo. Her brother-in-law repeated slowly from the other end. "Are you sure?" Mrs. Adeyemi's throat tightened. That was the name on the card. There was a pause, a long one. "If that man was present," he said carefully, "then this is bigger than you think." How she snapped. He sighed. "Because men like that do not attend weddings by accident, and they do not intervene unless something serious has happened." The room felt smaller. Meanwhile, across town, Amara sat in her childhood home, quiet, spacious, untouched by time. She wore simple clothes, her hair pulled back loosely. The faint bruise on her cheek had darkened slightly, a silent reminder of yesterday's violence. Her father watched her from across the room. "Do you regret leaving?" he asked. Amara shook her head. "I regret believing silence would protect me." He nodded. "Silence protects peace, not dignity." She looked down. "I never wanted this to become a battle." "This is not a battle," he said gently. "It is a reckoning." Later that morning, Daniel arrived. He stood at the gate for several minutes before gathering the courage to knock. When the door opened, his confidence dissolved. The house was larger than he had imagined. Controlled, quiet, powerful, without trying. Amara appeared at the top of the stairs. Their eyes met. She did not smile. "Can we talk?" Daniel asked softly. She nodded and led him to the sitting room. "I failed you," he said immediately. "I should have stopped her long before it got to that point." Amara listened quietly. "I thought patience was love," he continued, "but I was wrong. I asked you to carry pain I was too afraid to confront." Her eyes softened slightly, but only slightly. "Love is not asking someone to endure abuse," she said. "Love is protection." Daniel swallowed. "I want to choose you. Fully. Even if it costs me my comfort." She looked at him for a long moment. Choices matter most when they come late. Before he could respond, a door opened behind them. Chief Kola Adebayo entered the room. Daniel rose instinctively. The presence was undeniable. "Sit," the older man said calmly. "We need to understand each other." Daniel obeyed, heart pounding. "I loved your daughter without knowing who she was," Daniel said carefully. "I don't care about your wealth or your name." Chief Adebayo studied him. "Then why did you let her be treated as if she had none?" The question cut deep. Daniel had no answer. At the Adeyemi house, Mrs. Adeyemi received another call, this time from a woman she respected deeply. "You should apologize," the voice on the line advised, "not because of gossip, because of consequence." "Consequence," Mrs. Adeyemi repeated. "Yes. When dignity is violated publicly, it demands a response. And I hear the response is coming." Her hands shook as she ended the call. She had built her life believing control was strength, but control was slipping. and for the first time, she did not know how to reclaim it. Back at Amara's home, Chief Adebayo finally spoke again. I raised my daughter to walk away from power when it dehumanized her, he said. She chose love over comfort, and she paid for it. Daniel looked at Amara. I won't let her pay again. The older man nodded slowly. Then you must be ready to stand alone if necessary. I am, Daniel said without hesitation. Chief Adebayo turned to his daughter. The next step is yours. Amara took a deep breath. I don't want revenge, she said. I want respect. And I want peace. Her father smiled faintly. Peace comes after truth. That afternoon, invitations were quietly sent, not public announcements, not dramatic summons, just requests for presence. A meeting, neutral ground, no audience. Mrs. Adeyemi received hers just before sunset. Her heart sank. At the bottom of the message was a simple line, "We will speak as adults." She sat down slowly. For the first time since the slap, she understood something clearly. This was no longer about a wedding. It was about who she had chosen to be when power was in her hand and who she would be when it was taken away. As night fell, Amara stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker on one by one. Are you afraid? Her father asked softly. She shook her head. No, I'm ready. Because tomorrow, silence would no longer speak for her, and the truth, long ignored, would finally step into the light. Daniel did not sleep that night. He lay on the unfamiliar bed in Amara's childhood home, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment that had led him here. Each memory came with a sharp realization how many times he had chosen comfort over courage, silence over truth. In the early hours of the morning, he rose quietly and stepped outside. The compound was still guarded by tall walls and trimmed hedges. Somewhere in the distance, the city was waking up, unaware that a reckoning was quietly unfolding behind those gates. He thought of his mother. Mrs. Adeyemi had raised him alone after his father died young. She had sacrificed, struggled, and fought her way into respectability. Daniel had admired her strength all his life, but admiration had slowly turned into obedience, and obedience had turned into fear of disappointing her. That fear had cost him everything. Inside the house, Amara sat at the dining table with her father. She was calm, but her eyes carried a quiet alertness, like someone standing at the edge of an important decision. Daniel entered slowly. I've been thinking, he began. Chief Adebayo gestured for him to sit. Good. Thinking is where accountability starts. Daniel swallowed. I know apologies are easy to give after damage is done, but I need you both to understand something. Amara met his gaze. I'm not here to beg for forgiveness. He continued, I'm here to make a choice and accept the consequences. Chief Adebayo leaned back slightly, watching him closely. My mother will not change overnight, Daniel said, and I won't pretend she didn't hurt you, but I also won't hide behind her anymore. He turned to Amara. If you choose to walk away from me, I will accept it, fully. But if you choose to give me another chance, I promise this, no one will ever raise a hand to you again in my presence. No one will ever reduce you to silence while I stand beside you. The room was quiet. Amara breathed deeply. I loved you, she said softly. But love without protection feels like abandonment. Daniel nodded. I understand that now. She stood and walked slowly toward the window, looking out at the city. For months, I endured disrespect because I believed patience was strength, she said. But patience without boundaries invites cruelty. She turned back to him. If we continue, it will not be as before. He nodded again. It shouldn't be. Chief Adebayo finally spoke. Daniel, he said calmly, do you know what power truly tests? Daniel shook his head. Not loyalty, the older man said. Not ambition. Power tests character under pressure. Yesterday, you failed that test. Daniel winced. But Chief Adebayo continued. Today, you asked to take it again. He rose from his seat. There will be a meeting this evening, he said. Your mother has been invited. Daniel stiffened. She agreed to come. She didn't decline, Chief Adebayo replied. That is already a step. Daniel exhaled slowly. At the Adeyemi house, Mrs. Adeyemi prepared for the meeting with trembling hands. She chose a modest outfit, nothing flashy. For the first time in years, she looked unsure of how she would be received. Every instinct in her screamed to assert control, to defend herself. But something deeper whispered that defense might no longer work. Her sister watched her quietly. You are afraid, the sister said gently. I am cautious, Mrs. Adeyemi replied sharply, then paused. Yes, I am afraid. At the appointed time, the cars arrived at the neutral venue, a private residence owned by a trusted mutual acquaintance. No cameras, no audience, just a quiet room and uncomfortable truths. Mrs. Adeyemi entered first, then Daniel, then Amara and her father. The tension was immediate. Mrs. Adeyemi avoided Amara's eyes at first. When she finally looked up, she flinched at the faint mark still visible on Amara's cheek. Chief Adebayo did not raise his voice. We are here to speak plainly, he said. No titles, no pride, just truth. Mrs. Adeyemi straightened her back. I was disrespected in my son's wedding. Daniel turned to her sharply. No, Mama. You disrespected yourself. The words stunned her. I will not pretend what you did was discipline, he continued. It was violence. And I stood there too long. Her eyes filled with tears, not of apology, but of shock. I raised you. And I am grateful. Daniel interrupted gently, but gratitude does not excuse harm. Amara spoke, then her voice steady. I did not come here to shame you, she said. I came to reclaim myself. Mrs. Adeyemi looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time saw not a girl beneath her, but a woman standing firmly on her own ground. I don't want your fear, Amara continued. I want your respect, or your distance. Silence filled the room. Mrs. Adeyemi's shoulders sagged slightly. I was wrong, she said at last, the words scraping against her pride. But I thought strength meant control. Chief Adebayo nodded. Many do. Mrs. Adeyemi looked at Daniel. And you let me believe that. Daniel lowered his head. I won't anymore. The meaning was clear. If Mrs. Adeyemi wished to remain in her son's life, things would change. The meeting ended without hugs, without resolution, but with something far more powerful. Boundaries. As they stood to leave, Mrs. Adeyemi stopped Amara. I don't ask forgiveness yet, she said quietly. I don't deserve it, Amara nodded. Acknowledgement is a beginning. Outside, Daniel walked beside Amara in silence. I don't know what happens next, he admitted. Amara looked at him calmly. Neither do I. But whatever happens, it will be honest. For the first time, Daniel felt something settle in his chest. Not relief, not triumph. Responsibility. And that he realized was the true beginning of manhood. The days following the meeting were quiet, but not peaceful. Silence does not always mean calm. Sometimes it means tension waiting for the right moment to surface. For Mrs. Adeyemi, every hour felt like borrowed time. She moved through her house carefully now, as if the walls themselves were listening. Calls went unanswered. Invitations stopped coming. People who once sought her opinion suddenly remembered other appointments. Power, she was learning, was not permanent. Across town, Amara returned to her routine, not as an escape, but as an anchor. She went back to the community center, greeted the children by name, listened to widows share the same worries they had shared for years. Life there did not pause for scandal. It moved forward, grounded in need and patience. But people noticed her. They noticed the quiet confidence with which she spoke, the way she carried herself, not hardened, not bitter, but resolved. They noticed the men who waited respectfully before speaking to her father when he came to visit, and how decisions seemed to form around his presence without him ever raising his voice. Rumors followed. That's her father, the one who owns half the coastline developments. No, that's someone else. He controls the banks. I heard he turned down a government seat. Truth began to shape itself from fragments. At a business luncheon that week, Mrs. Adeyemi overheard her name spoken softly at another table. She paused, pretending to check her phone. She didn't know one woman whispered. Know what another asked. The bride. That she was the daughter of that man. Mrs. Adeyemi's heart skipped. Which man? A pause. Then the answer, spoken with care. Kola Adebayo. The room felt suddenly too small. She excused herself, hands trembling as she stepped outside. The realization hit her fully, then not as fear, but as humiliation. She had not just slapped a bride, she had assaulted the daughter of a man whose influence she had unknowingly benefited from for years. Contracts, loans, connections, all traced back to quiet approvals she had never questioned. That evening, Daniel visited his mother. He found her sitting alone, staring at nothing. "Mama," he said gently. She looked up, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "They all know now." Daniel nodded. It was never meant to be hidden forever. She laughed bitterly, and she never said a word. That was her strength, Daniel replied, not her weakness. Mrs. Adeyemi pressed her lips together. "I thought power was loud," she whispered. "I thought it demanded obedience." Daniel sat across from her. Real power doesn't need to prove itself. Meanwhile, an invitation arrived, formal, understated, impossible to ignore. A charity foundation gala. Host, the Adebayo Trust. Purpose education and women's empowerment across West Africa. Names of attendees included governors, CEOs, philanthropists, and one more. Mrs. Adeyemi stared at the card for a long time. "Is this a trap?" she asked Daniel quietly. "No," he replied. "It's an invitation." On the night of the gala, the venue glowed with elegance, not excess, but intention. Conversations flowed easily, guided by mutual respect rather than competition. When Chief Adebayo entered the room, shifted not with applause, but with attention. Amara walked beside him. She wore a simple dress, no jewelry beyond a delicate chain. Her presence was calm assured. Mrs. Adeyemi arrived late. As she stepped inside, conversations softened. Heads turned not with judgment, but with curiosity. She felt exposed, uncertain. For the first time in years, she was not the one commanding the room. Then she saw Amara, not on a stage, not at the center, but surrounded, listened to, respected. Mrs. Adeyemi approached slowly. Amara noticed her and excused herself politely from the group. They stood facing each other, the noise of the room fading. "I didn't come to confront you." Mrs. Adeyemi began, her voice low. "I came because I needed to see for myself." Amara nodded. "And what did you see?" Mrs. Adeyemi swallowed. "That I was wrong about everything that mattered." Amara said nothing. "I raised my hand because I felt threatened." Mrs. Adeyemi continued, "Not by your background, but by your calm, your refusal to bow." Amara met her gaze steadily. "I don't bow to fear." Tears welled in Mrs. Adeyemi's eyes. "I don't expect forgiveness." "I don't offer it cheaply," Amara replied. "But I recognize honesty." They stood there in silence. Two women, once divided by pride, now connected by consequence. Later that evening, Chief Adebayo addressed the room not with speeches, but with gratitude. He spoke of dignity, of restraint, of the danger of mistaking status for worth. "No one is above accountability," he said. "Not wealth, not age, not tradition." Mrs. Adeyemi felt each word like a mirror held too close. When the gala ended, she approached Chief Adebayo. "I failed your daughter," she said quietly. He nodded. Yes. She braced herself. But he continued. She did not fail herself. Mrs. Adeyemi bowed her head not in submission, but in recognition. Outside, Daniel stood beside Amara. "They see you now," he said. She shook her head. "They see themselves." As they walked into the night, the city lights reflected in the glass behind them. Amara felt something settle inside her. Not victory, not revenge, balance. And far away, Mrs. Adeyemi sat alone in her car, realizing that the slap she had delivered in anger had stripped her of illusions she didn't know she carried. Power had changed hands, not dramatically, not violently, but permanently. The room was full, yet unusually quiet. It wasn't the silence of fear. This time it was the silence of expectation. People had gathered not because they were summoned, but because they sensed something important was about to be said. When truth walks calmly toward the center, even the proud lean in to listen. The occasion was not a press conference, not a confrontation. It was a public forum, organized by the Adebayo Trust, focused on women's dignity, family influence, and generational responsibility. Elders sat beside young professionals, religious leaders beside business owners, mothers beside daughters. Amara sat in the front row, not on the stage, not elevated, just present. Chief Kola Adebayo stepped forward, not behind a podium, but into the open space between chairs. His voice, when he spoke, did not demand attention. It earned it. "I have been asked many times," he began, "why I waited. The room leaned closer. Why I did not intervene earlier. Why I did not use influence to prevent pain. Amara's hands rested calmly in her lap. I waited. He continued, because my daughter asked me to trust her strength. A murmur passed through the audience. She chose a life where her name did not shield her, he said, where her voice had to stand on its own, where respect could not be purchased. He paused, and when she was struck publicly unjustly, I did not rise in anger. I rose in responsibility. All eyes turned toward Mrs. Adeyemi, seated quietly near the aisle. She did not flinch. Her face was composed, but her hands were clasped tightly together. Chief Adebayo continued. This is not a story about wealth, he said. It is a story about power, and how easily power forgets its limits when unchecked. He turned slightly toward the audience. Tradition is meant to guide us, not excuse harm. Parenthood is meant to protect, not dominate. And silence should never be mistaken for consent. The words settled heavy but fair. Then he looked at Amara. My daughter did not raise her voice, he said. She did not retaliate. She did not humiliate anyone in return. Amara lifted her chin slightly. She chose dignity. The room breathed as one. Then, unexpectedly, Mrs. Adeyemi stood. There was a ripple of surprise. Some turned in their seats. Others stiffened, unsure what would come next. She did not wait to be invited. I would like to speak, she said. Her voice was steady, but not commanding. The room fell silent again. I was raised to believe that respect must be enforced, she began. That authority must be seen and felt. She paused, choosing her words carefully. When I saw a woman who did not fear me, I mistook her calm for defiance, and I responded with violence. No excuses, no justifications. I was wrong. Amara felt a quiet tightening in her chest, not pain, but recognition. Mrs. Adeyemi turned toward her. I am not asking forgiveness today, she said. I am acknowledging harm, and the truth is, I struck her because I felt small. The honesty startled the room. I believed power made me untouchable. Mrs. Adeyemi continued, but it only made me blind. She bowed her head, not in shame, but in accountability. Amara stood, not suddenly, not dramatically, just stood. The room watched. I never wanted to be defended by my father's name, Amara said. That is why I never used it. She took a breath. But I also learned something important. She turned toward the audience. Endurance is not the same as strength, she said, and patience is not an invitation for abuse. Her voice did not shake. I stayed silent because I believed love required sacrifice, she continued. But I learned that love without respect becomes harm. She turned back to Mrs. Adeyemi. I accept your acknowledgement, Amara said, not because it erases what happened, but because it allows us both to move forward truthfully. Mrs. Adeyemi nodded, eyes glistening. Chief Adebayo smiled faintly. This, he said softly, is how cycles end. The audience erupted not in applause, but in something deeper. A collective exhale, a release. After the forum, conversations flowed differently. People spoke with less certainty, more listening. Mothers held daughters' hands tighter. Sons watched their mothers with new awareness. Daniel stood beside Amara as they stepped outside into the evening air. You didn't need to forgive, he said quietly. She nodded. I didn't. I chose clarity. He smiled faintly. That's stronger than anger. Mrs. Adeyemi approached them slowly. I will spend the rest of my life learning, she said, not leading. Amara met her gaze. Learning is leadership. As they parted ways that night, something fundamental had shifted not just between individuals, but within the space they all occupied. Power had been redefined, respect had been reclaimed, and truth had been spoken without anger, which made it impossible to ignore. Change did not arrive with celebration. It arrived quietly, like a new air pressure in familiar rooms, subtle at first, undeniable with time. After the forum, after the public acknowledgement, after the careful words spoken without anger, life resumed. But it did not resume the same way. For Mrs. Adeyemi, the mornings were the hardest. She woke earlier than usual now, not because she needed to, but because sleep no longer protected her from thought. In the quiet hours before dawn, she replayed moments she once dismissed Amara's calm greetings, her steady eyes, the way she never begged for approval. The slap returned in fragments, the sound, the stillness, the shock on faces she had once controlled. She found herself avoiding mirrors. At church, people greeted her politely, but without the deference she had grown used to. The respect was no longer automatic. It required something new: humility. Some conversations stopped when she approached. Others continued, but with a different tone. Mrs. Adeyemi had not been stripped of community. She had been stripped of certainty, and that frightened her more than isolation ever could. Daniel noticed the change immediately. His mother listened, now really listened, when others spoke. She asked questions instead of issuing instructions. Sometimes she caught herself raising her voice, then paused, inhaled, and softened it again. These small acts cost her effort. He could see it in her shoulders, in the way her hands clenched and unclenched. One evening, as they sat together over tea, she spoke quietly. I don't know who I am without control, she admitted. Daniel looked at her gently. You're learning. She nodded. Learning feels like losing. He reached across the table and squeezed her hand. It's not. Across town, Amara experienced her own adjustments. People treated her differently, now not with fear, but with curiosity and respect. Some asked questions that bordered on admiration. Others offered apologies for silence they now regretted. She accepted none of it dramatically. She returned to her work at the community center, but the weight of her presence had changed. Young women listened more closely. Older women sought her counsel, not because of her father's name, but because she spoke from experience without bitterness. One afternoon, a teenage girl pulled her aside. They say you could have destroyed them, the girl whispered. Why didn't you? Amara smiled softly. Destruction teaches fear. Dignity teaches change. Daniel joined Amara in these routines. He showed up early, helped set chairs, listened instead of speaking. People watched him carefully, at first waiting for performance, but time revealed consistency. When Amara disagreed with him, he listened. When she set boundaries, he respected them. When his mother crossed a line, even unintentionally, he addressed it calmly. Love, Amara realized, was changing shape. Not loud, not dramatic, but firm. One evening, Daniel asked a question he had been carrying for weeks. Do you still want to marry me? Amara did not answer immediately. She considered the past, the pain, the silence, the choice to walk away. She considered the present, the honesty, the effort, the accountability. Then she considered herself. I want a partnership, she said finally, not a promise. Daniel nodded. Then let's build one. They did not announce anything. They did not rush. They allowed time to test their intentions. Meanwhile, consequences continued to unfold. Mrs. Adeyemi received fewer invitations to speak at social gatherings. When she was invited, her words were received with polite distance. She felt the loss keenly, but she also felt something unexpected: relief. She no longer needed to perform authority. She no longer needed to prove dominance. The constant vigilance had been exhausting, and she hadn't realized how heavy it was until it was gone. One afternoon, she visited Amara. Not unannounced, not entitled. She called first. When Amara opened the door, Mrs. Adeyemi stood awkwardly, holding a small bag. I brought soup, she said quietly. If that's okay. Amara stepped aside. Come in. They sat together at the table. No speeches, no apologies repeated. Just presence. I don't know how to repair what I broke, Mrs. Adeyemi admitted. Amara met her gaze. Repair starts with consistency. Mrs. Adeyemi nodded slowly. Then I will start there. The soup cooled between them as the city hummed outside life, continuing indifferent to personal reckonings. Elsewhere, Chief Adebayo watched with measured satisfaction. He did not interfere. He did not instruct. He observed. He had seen power destroy families. He had also seen humility rebuild them. What mattered now was not declarations, but endurance. At a small dinner one night, he spoke to Daniel privately. You are being watched, he said calmly. Daniel stiffened. By you, by life, Chief Adebayo replied. Consistency is louder than confession. Daniel absorbed the words. As weeks turned into months, the story of the slap faded from public conversation. But its imprint remained, reshaping relationships, recalibrating values. Mrs. Adeyemi volunteered quietly at a women's shelter, saying little about who she was. She listened more than she spoke. When someone recognized her and whispered, she neither denied nor defended herself. Amara noticed. People can change, Daniel said one evening. Yes, Amara replied, when consequences meet reflection. They sat together in silence, comfortable now, unafraid of pauses. What had begun as humiliation had become a mirror. What had been silence had become voice. What had been power had become responsibility, and slowly, without fanfare, a new balance took shape, fragile, honest, real. The kind that could only exist after truth had been faced. Amara learned something important about herself in the months that followed. She learned that healing was not a straight line. Some days felt light, full of clarity and purpose. Other days, a sound, a memory, or a careless word could reopen something she thought was already closed. What surprised her most was not the pain, but the strength that remained after it. She no longer questioned her worth. She no longer waited for permission to speak. And she no longer confused love with endurance. The community center had become more than a workplace. It was a place where stories met truth. Women came with bruises hidden beneath scarves. Young girls came with questions they were afraid to ask at home. Amara listened not as someone above them, but as someone who had stood where they stood. One afternoon, during a quiet moment, a woman asked her, "How did you know when to leave?" Amara paused before answering. "I didn't leave because I was weak," she said. "I left because I was strong enough to stop explaining my pain." Those words stayed with her. Daniel watched this transformation with both pride and humility. He admired her clarity, but he also feared it, because clarity meant choice, and choice meant he could lose her if he failed again. He tried not to promise. He focused on action. When his mother called, he listened, but he did not excuse. When she apologized, he accepted, but he did not rush reconciliation. When she overstepped, even gently, he addressed it calmly and firmly. Mrs. Adeyemi noticed. At first, the change wounded her pride. She had been used to immediate obedience, unquestioned loyalty. Now, her son treated her as an equal adult. No more, no less. One evening, she confronted him. "You speak to me differently now," she said. Daniel met her eyes. "Because I am different," she sighed. "I feel like I'm losing you." He shook his head. "You're not losing me. You're meeting me." The words hurt, but they were honest. Amara had not yet decided what she wanted next. Marriage was no longer a destination she rushed toward. It was a possibility, conditional, intentional, earned. She spent time alone walking through familiar streets, sitting quietly in places that once felt insignificant. She asked herself difficult questions. Could she trust again without shrinking? Could she build a future without erasing the past? Could love exist without fear? One evening, she asked her father to walk with her. They strolled through the garden, the air cool, the light soft. "Do you want me to decide for you?" Chief Adebayo asked gently. She smiled faintly. "You never did." He nodded. "Good." She stopped walking and faced him. "I don't want to be defined by what happened," she said. "But I also don't want to pretend it didn't matter." He studied her with quiet pride. "That's wisdom. The world expects me to forgive, to forget, to move on," she continued. "But I want to move forward with boundaries." He placed a hand on her shoulder. Boundaries are not walls. They are doors with locks. That night, Amara called Daniel. "I need to speak clearly," she said. They met the next day, sitting across from each other in a small cafe. Neutral ground, familiar, but not intimate. "I won't marry you yet," Amara said, calmly. Daniel nodded. He had expected this. But she continued, "I'm not closing the door." He looked up. "If we move forward," she said, "it will be slowly, transparently, and with one condition." "Anything," Daniel replied. "My dignity is not negotiable," she said. "Not with your mother. Not with society. Not with you." Daniel did not hesitate. Agreed. She studied his face, searching for fear, resistance, hesitation. There was none. "Then we continue," she said, "as equals." Word of Amara's stance spread quietly, not as gossip, but as example. Some called her stubborn. Others called her brave. Many women called her late at night, whispering questions they had never dared ask aloud. Mrs. Adeyemi heard of Amara's decision from Daniel. "She set terms," he said simply. Mrs. Adeyemi nodded slowly. As she should. The admission surprised them both. I spent my life setting terms for others. Mrs. Adeyemi continued, I never thought someone would one day set them for me. Daniel watched her carefully. How do you feel about that? She was quiet for a long moment. Relieved, she said, it means I no longer have to pretend I'm always right. That honesty marked another shift. One weekend, Mrs. Adeyemi visited the community center not as a benefactor, not as a leader. She asked where she could help. When someone handed her a broom, she took it without comment. Amara noticed from across the room. Later, Mrs. Adeyemi approached her. I won't ask to be close, she said quietly, but I will respect the distance you set. Amara met her gaze. That's all I ask. The boundary held. It did not erase the past, but it protected the future. As months passed, Amara felt lighter, not because everything was resolved, but because everything was honest. She no longer feared confrontation. She no longer carried shame that was never hers to begin with. One evening, Daniel took her hand as they walked. You changed everything, he said. She shook her head. I changed myself. Everything else followed. And that was the truth, because the most powerful moment of the story was never the slap. It was the moment Amara decided she would never again stay where her humanity was optional. When the idea of a wedding returned, it did not arrive with excitement. It arrived cautiously, like a question neither of them rushed to answer. Months had passed since the slap, months of rebuilding, observing, choosing differently. Life had not paused to wait for closure. It had kept moving quietly, testing intentions with time. One evening, as Amara and Daniel sat on a bench overlooking the city, Daniel finally spoke, the thought he had been holding back. If we do this again, he said carefully, I don't want it to look like what it was before. Amara nodded. Neither do I. They sat in silence for a while, listening to distant traffic and evening prayers drifting through the air. I don't want a wedding that proves anything. She continued, I want one that reflects something. Daniel smiled faintly. What choice? She replied. Respect. Accountability. That was how it began, not with invitations, not with venues, but with agreement. They decided the ceremony would be small. No grand hall, no spectacle designed to impress. Just people who mattered, people who had shown up when it counted. Mrs. Adeyemi heard of the plan from Daniel. A small wedding, she repeated. Yes, Daniel said calmly. That's what Amara wants. Mrs. Adeyemi paused. Her old instincts stirred the desire to advise, to correct, to expand. But she caught herself. Then that is what it should be, she said quietly. It was not resignation. It was respect. She asked one question only. May I attend? Daniel hesitated, then replied honestly. That's Amara's decision. When he relayed the question, Amara did not answer immediately. She considered what attendance meant, not forgiveness, not erasure, but presence. She considered the consistency Mrs. Adeyemi had shown, the quiet volunteering, the measured words, the acceptance of distance. She may attend, Amara said finally, as a guest, not as an authority. Daniel nodded, understood. Word spread, not widely, not loudly. There would be no announcement, no countdown, just a date shared quietly with those who needed to know. The day arrived without fanfare. The venue was an open garden space just outside the city. Trees offered shade. Chairs were arranged in a simple semicircle. No elevated stage, no division between families. Amara arrived early. She wore a modest dress, elegant, unassuming. Her hair was natural, her face calm. There was no veil, no armor. She stood for a moment, breathing in the air, grounding herself. Her father approached quietly. "You look at peace," he observed. "I am," she replied, "because this time I am choosing not enduring." He smiled. Guests arrived slowly. Friends from the community center, a few colleagues, Daniel's close relatives. No one whispered. No one evaluated. The atmosphere was gentle, expectant, but unforced. Mrs. Adeyemi arrived last. She wore a simple outfit, subdued, respectful. She did not attempt to greet Amara immediately. She took her seat quietly, hands folded, eyes observant. When Amara noticed her, their eyes met briefly. No tension, no hostility, just acknowledgement. Daniel arrived moments later, visibly nervous, but grounded. When he saw Amara, he smiled, not the proud smile of possession, but the grateful smile of partnership. The officiant spoke briefly. Not about endurance, not about obedience, but about consent, responsibility, and shared growth. When it was time to speak, Amara went first. "I stand here by choice," she said, her voice clear. "Not because love demands sacrifice, but because love has learned to protect." Daniel followed. "I stand here, accountable," he said. "Not because tradition expects it, but because respect requires it." There was no objection, no interruption, no raised voice. When they exchanged vows, they were simple promises: to listen, to intervene, to choose honesty over comfort. The ceremony ended not with applause, but with quiet smiles and shared relief. Afterward, people lingered. Conversations flowed easily. Children laughed. Someone played soft music from a small speaker. Mrs. Adeyemi remained seated for a while, watching. She watched how Amara moved through the space, unhurried, assured. She watched how Daniel deferred to her, checked in with her, included her. She felt something unfamiliar stir in her chest. Not regret. Understanding. Later she approached Amara carefully. "You didn't have to invite me," she said. Amara met her gaze. "I invited you because exclusion wasn't the lesson." Mrs. Adeyemi nodded. "And what was, that power doesn't entitle us to space," Amara replied. "Presence does." Mrs. Adeyemi swallowed. "Thank you." It was the first time she said those words without expectation. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the garden, Amara and Daniel stood together, watching their guests drift away. "This feels right," Daniel said. Amara smiled. "Because it is honest." Her father joined them briefly. "You redefined something today," he said. "Not marriage, but authority." Amara shook her head. "I redefined myself." He nodded. "That's always the beginning." As evening settled, Mrs. Adeyemi prepared to leave. Before she did, she turned to Daniel. "I raised you to be strong," she said. "But today I saw you be just." Daniel smiled softly. "I learned from mistakes." She looked at Amara once more. "I will not overstep," she said, "but I will show up if allowed." Amara nodded. "That's enough." When the garden finally emptied, Amara stood alone for a moment, looking at the chairs, the fading light, the quiet aftermath. This wedding had no slap, no spectacle, no humiliation. It had something far rarer: consent. And in that consent, Amara found a peace that no grand ceremony could ever provide. Life after the wedding did not slow down to admire itself. It moved forward quietly, steadily, testing whether the changes that had been spoken would hold under ordinary pressure. Because transformation is not proven in ceremonies. It is proven on random mornings, difficult conversations, and unobserved choices. Amara and Daniel settled into a rhythm that felt new but grounded. They did not rush to impress anyone. Their home was modest, warm, intentional. Decisions were discussed, not announced. Disagreements were addressed, not buried. When tension rose, neither retreated into silence nor dominance. They paused, listened, and returned to the same principle that had carried them this far. Dignity first. Daniel changed in ways that surprised even himself. At work, he stopped avoiding conflict. He spoke up when colleagues dismissed others unfairly. When a supervisor made a careless joke at someone else's expense, Daniel challenged it calmly, firmly. He was no longer afraid of being disliked for doing what was right. At home, he remained attentive. When Amara felt overwhelmed, he did not fix, he supported. When she set boundaries, he defended them, even when it was inconvenient. And when his mother visited, he made sure respect was mutual and visible. Mrs. Adeyemi noticed. At first, she felt the boundaries like walls she could not climb. She was used to access authority's centrality. Now, she waited to be invited. She asked before advising. She listened more than she spoke. It was uncomfortable, but it was also freeing. She spent more time volunteering no longer for redemption, but for understanding. In the shelter, she met women whose stories mirrored parts of Amara's that she had once ignored. She listened without interrupting. When asked for advice, she spoke carefully, aware of the weight words could carry. One afternoon, she admitted to a woman beside her, "I once believed fear was respect." The woman replied gently, "Fear is silence. Respect speaks." Those words stayed with her. Amara continued her work at the community center, but her role evolved. She trained new facilitators. She created safe spaces for women to speak without shame. She refused titles that elevated her above others, choosing instead to remain accessible. When asked to share her story publicly, she declined most invitations. "This is not a performance," she would say. "It's a practice." Her father watched with quiet pride. Chief Adebayo remained present but unobtrusive. He did not intervene unless asked. He did not announce his support. He simply showed up consistently, respectfully, without conditions. One evening, he sat with Amara on the veranda. "You didn't need my name," he said. She smiled. "I needed your trust." He nodded. "You earned mine long ago." Time passed. The story of the slap faded into memory, not forgotten, but transformed. It became a reference point, a lesson shared quietly among families, among women, teaching daughters among men, learning accountability. Not as gossip, as caution. One day, Daniel received a call from a younger cousin. "My fiance's family says she should just endure certain things." The cousin said hesitantly, "What should I do?" Daniel did not answer immediately. "Ask yourself," he said finally, "whether endurance is love or avoidance." The line was quiet. Later, the cousin called back. I spoke up. Change does not always announce itself. Sometimes it spreads quietly person to person. Mrs. Adeyemi visited Amara less frequently now, not out of distance, but out of balance. When she did, the visits were simple. Tea, conversation, presence. One afternoon, she said something that surprised them both. "I'm grateful you didn't forgive me too quickly," she admitted. "It forced me to change for the right reasons." Amara nodded. Forgiveness without transformation is pressure, not peace. As seasons shifted, the city continued its noise, its struggle, its beauty. Life carried on imperfect and demanding. But something fundamental had changed. A woman had refused to be humiliated into silence. A man had chosen courage over comfort. A mother had learned restraint over control. And a father had trusted his daughter's strength more than his own power. The lesson was not dramatic. It was durable, because the true victory was never exposure. It was evolution. Life rarely announces its lessons loudly. Most of the time, they arrive disguised as pain, humiliation, or silence. This story reminds us that dignity is not something others give us. It is something we choose to protect. Endurance is often praised, especially for women. But endurance without boundaries teaches people how to harm us more effectively. Respect does not come from fear, age, wealth, or tradition. It comes from accountability. Power reveals who we are when no one stops us. And character reveals itself when we are finally stopped. If you've ever stayed quiet to keep the peace, if you've ever been told to endure instead of being protected, this story is for you. What would change in your life if you chose dignity today? Share your thoughts in the comments. Where are you watching from? And what time is it there? If stories of truth, growth, and human value matter to you, subscribe to the channel and walk this journey with us.